I'm going to talk about is how to fight list attrition, and this is something that everybody is faced with. Basically, a database will deteriorate about 30%, 20, 30% a year, and that typically is attributed to a number of different factors. People switch their jobs, they change ISPs, they may graduate from school. They simply might abandon an email address just because they've given it out so many times, and now they're getting so much spam that they're not able to see the messages that they're actually looking for. And also corporate rebranding. Typically, that amounts to about 50 million people a year that change their email address. And really, I'm going to talk about a couple of different ways that you can kind of fight that, negative process. So the first thing I want to talk about is ECOA, and that means Email Change of Address. So basically, just like the National Change of Address Registry, which is NCOA for direct mail, but it's for the internet. So what it does is it allows you to keep track of somebody's new email address after they've stopped using the older one. And typically, when we encounter these scenarios where people come to us and they'll say, we've been running marketing campaigns for a couple of years, and now we've accumulated this database of these email addresses that are constantly hard bouncing, that are undeliverable. We can typically recover up to 20% of that. And really, you want to look at a database of at least 100,000 records for the ECOA service to be plausible or effective. And really, it's a very effective way to re-engage with lost prospects or clients. And what we find is that when a client typically runs an ECOA project, the response rates after those email addresses are plugged into their standard email marketing campaigns is higher because there's a previous relationship there. So typically we say that really ECOA should be done probably at least once a year. Ideally, you want to run it on a quarterly basis. But what it allows you to do is re-engage with people and constantly introduce new email addresses into your email marketing campaign so it doesn't become stale. Because otherwise, without using ECOA, you're losing email addresses on the back end while you're going out and acquiring new email addresses on the front. So you want to make sure that you basically stop that loss and run ECOA at least once or a year, at the very least, quarterly. If you are going to be doing it once a year, a good time, especially on the retail side, is to run it right towards the middle of Q3 so that you can basically start introducing those new email addresses into your marketing campaigns in time to take advantage of all the sales and promotions that happen during the holiday season. So just to kind of give you an idea of what the process looks like, we start with your kind of old database of hard bouncing and deliverable email addresses. We run it through our Safe to Send service, which basically takes a look at the list and basically does a number of different things, including identifying any email addresses that might be toxic. It identifies frequent complainers, people who are on the do not email list. So basically it ensures that we start with a list that has email addresses that are not toxic and are not going to have a negative impact on your marketing campaigns. Then we match those email addresses to new active email addresses. And once we've got that identified, we run it through Safe to Send again to make sure that, in those steps we've taken before, nothing has gotten into that list that, again, is going to have a negative impact on your deliverability. The next step, which is number 4, and this is very important, is we send the opt-in email. Now, typically, some clients prefer to send their own, but I would say 99% of the time, Fresh Address handles the opt-in, the permission messaging, and that's what we talked about earlier, is you want to make sure that you send an email to the client that very clearly states, hey, listen, we'd love to re-engage with you, what the offer is, maybe to receive promotions, discounts, and also clearly give them the option to opt out. And typically on an ECOA campaign, you should expect the opt-out to be right around the 2% range, and we've seen that standard across different industries. And then so once we've received back the list of opt-outs, opt-ins, we run that through our safe to send process again, and that basically makes the list absolutely pristine, and you're going to have pretty much 100% inbox placement, because everything that's toxic or has any kind of negative impact on deliverability has been flagged and can be suppressed. Just to give you an idea of what a timeline is for a typical ECOA project, roughly it runs about 18 days. So really, we tell people you really want to do it a month before you're planning to start actually doing the deployment. So, first day we basically project initiation, we QC the initial data file. Days 2 through 4 we run through the hygiene processing. Then we match process and match the assembly, and then we do QC again. We prep the message, and day 8 to 15 is when we do the permission message, and we do a couple of different deployments. We have a wait period, and then we do it again to give the maximum probability and then to a group of people to respond. Once that's been done, we do final assembly, we do QC, and then the results are returned, and at that point the client can start introducing the new accurate and deliverable email addresses into their standard email marketing campaigns. So here's a couple of examples of how our clients have used ECOA successfully. There's an international nonprofit. They generated an estimate $670,000 in contributions, which is a 1,000% ROI. And the irony there is those email addresses were sitting in their database the entire time. It's not like they went out and they had to acquire them and collect them different places. They've been sitting there all along. All they had to do is basically go in, run an ECOA project, identify new email addresses to match the old ones, and basically run the campaign, and you can see the results are, I consider phenomenal. And they're also able to update 135,000 hard bouncing email addresses. So this basically means that from now on, and those are email addresses you can use one time, once they're basically been activated, they've been run through safe to send, and included in the email marketing list, I mean, those are basically will become part of every standard campaign and will generate revenue in accordance with whatever the typical return rate is for the specific company. Another example is a leading pet supplier. They actually had a 25% increase in sales just for reconnecting with customers. And again, that goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier, that re-engaging with customers will typically have better results than trying to engage with newly acquired email addresses, because there is typically either brand recognition or some sort of relationship in place that will give you better results. And in this case, a small list, so they updated approximately 30,000 email addresses that were basically invalid and bouncing.